What's up everybody, welcome to a new episode of the KTM 250 rebuild. In the previous episode we finally revealed the graphics of the bike and we got them on there. So the build is basically ready, but we're going to do some preparations for the first ride in this episode. So what we need to do is still put some gearbox oil in there, and we want to set the sag of the rear shock. But before we want to do that, we need to make sure that all the parts are on the bike and all the fluids in the bike. So let's dive right into it. So before we're going to set the sag of the rear shock, we're going to make sure that the bike is completely ready to go. So first we're going to place the gearbox oil. I got some GP10 of Putoline. I always use this one and it works perfectly. So as well I got the plugs already out there. The plug with the magnet that is on the bottom end of the engine to drain the oil, and the oil level plug, so that we can place them back with new copper rings. As well we're going to place the air filter on there and put some grease on there, or oil. It doesn't weigh much, but I just want to make sure that all the weight is on the bike before we're going to set the sag. So also we need to fill the gas tank up with gas. That makes sure that the bike is at the weight on which I would normally go to ride. As well we're going to bleed the forks. Normally I always do that before I go riding. But also before I'm going to set the sag, I just want to make sure that the bike is completely the way how I would go ride with it. So yeah, let's just start with the gearbox oil. So to put the gearbox oil in, we're first going to put the drain plug in there with the new copper ring, and we're going to tighten it on 20 Newton meters. After that we're going to fill it up with 0.8 liters of gearbox oil. Then we will see if the oil is coming out of the hole of the oil level plug. And if that's the case, we're going to put the oil level plug back in place on a torque of 10 Newton meters. So yeah, and then we know that everything is tightened well and we have enough oil in there. So let's do that now. So the oil is coming out now. So now that the gearbox oil is in place, let's fill the gas tank. This funnel has a small hole, but let's try it. So now we have all the fluids in the bike, and now we're going to prepare the air filter. So let's first get the air filter cover off. And we make sure that there is no dirt in the air filter box. Always, if you feel with your hands, it's very easy to feel if there is any dirt in there, so you can get it easily out. Now this is prepared to put the air filter in, so let's prepare the air filter. So the oil that I use for my air filter is biodegradable filter oil from Note Oil.
It's quite easy to clean, and it's an easy process to get it into the filter. And when you want to clean it, you can just clean it with special soap from them, and then you're also able to just put them in your washing machine to get them very clean. And that saves some time compared to the other oils. So yeah, I really like this oil. Need to shake it very well. So I first fold it inside out, and then make sure to slap all the dust particles out there. I always make sure that I push these plastic bits to the inside and then fold it. This way we can make sure that it's fully drained from both sides, from all sides. Then usually I flip it around and do it again. And then we're just going to make sure that we get as much oil out of there as we can. And I make sure that I get as much oil off my gloves. And then the last step is to make sure that we evenly spread all the remaining oil on the filter. And also make sure that you're just hitting all the edges. So usually I just go around the edge like this, and then I spread all the oil on top of the filter and inside, of course, till we get a nice and evenly spread oil on the filter, like this. Then we're going to put the frame inside the filter. Just like that, and make sure that these pins are correctly in place as well. So now we can put it inside the bike. Just like that. So now that the air filter is in place, we're going to bleed the forks. So on the left side of the bike it's a 10mm plug, and I always use a screwdriver. Then that prevents me from putting too much force on these screws, because it's easily to damage them. So let's first take this one out, and I always like to just take them completely out, because I never know if there is an air bubble trapped or in some edge or something like that. So yeah, that's something I like to do. Some people just take it a little bit out until they hear the but sometimes I noticed that when I took it completely out, there came some more air out. You always want to turn it like to this side, because then this hole is the highest point of the fork. So we hear no air now. I didn't ride with these forks yet, so I wasn't expecting any air coming out, but it's better to be safe than sorry. And the other side is a T20 Torx. Also no air. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention is that you always need to make sure that your wheel is off the ground before you're doing this. So now that we are working on the forks, I'm going to check the pressure of my air fork as well. So the company where I brought my suspension for maintenance recommended to me to ride the forks with 10.2 bar. I believe that's the pressure that comes in there originally. So what you need to keep in mind is that you do this when everything is at like room temperature. So not when you just rode with it, then everything heats up and the pressure can change. So always do this before you're going to ride when everything is cooled down. So now it was 9.8 bar. So we're just going to bring it up to 10.2. Just like that. And that is 148 psi for the people that are using psi. So the last thing we're going to do before we set the sag of the rear shock we're going to put the tires on the right pressure. That doesn't really affect the sag of the rear shock, but I just like to finish everything before I start on the sag. So usually I like to ride with 0.9 bar in my tires, and that is around 14 or 13 psi. So this is still in the right spot. So I came to the conclusion that my front tire rotated on the rim, and you can see that by the air valve that is pointing forward. So normally you want to have it pointing a little bit backward or in the middle, otherwise your valve is going to break off your tube. So just for now I'm going to put the right pressure in there. Before we're going to ride, we need to turn the tire back with the tube, so the valve is straight again. So now that we have fully prepared the bike, and it's the way I would normally go and ride with it, we're going to set the sag of the rear shock. Normally you should check your sag once in a while, because over time your spring gets a little bit weaker, and especially when you have done some maintenance on your suspension, those are good times to check as well. So what we're going to do is first going to check the static sag. So I got some values in which the static sag and the dynamic sag needs to be. So static, without a rider on the bike, the sag needs to be between 30 and 32 millimeters. And dynamic, with a rider on there, the sag needs to be 95 to 100 millimeters. So what we're first going to do is get a reference. So you can measure your sag between your axle and a fixed point on your plastic. So I usually like to pick this pointy edge, because you can measure it on your tape measure quite easily. And the way you measure your sag is the difference between when it's on a stand and when it's on the ground. So now there is no weight on the shock, and your spring is not pushed in. So it's fully out now. So that will be the reference for the static and dynamic sag. And after that we're going to measure when we're having it on the ground without rider for the static sag, and with rider and gear for the dynamic sag. So we're first going to get the reference. So we're going to hook it up inside the axle and then measure it at this point. So it's 595 millimeters. So now we're going to set it onto the ground, and the same measurement should be between 30 and 32 millimeters less. So it's easier to set the sag with two persons, so one person can hold the bike and the other person can measure it. But for the static sag you can do it on your own as well, and I usually just do that by making sure that it's touching the wall a little bit and it's barely standing or almost falling down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the suspension a few times from the rear and front shock, and I will press at the front of the seat, so both of the suspension work at the same time. And then I will let it rest against the wall and we will measure it again. So it's 564 millimeter. So then we will subtract this value from the reference, so that is 31. So that seems to be exactly in the middle, so that's perfect. So now the only thing we need to do is the dynamic sag, and for that I need to put on all my gear and the boots, so that I have the weight of how I normally would ride, and then I will let somebody else measure the distance between the axle and this fixed point. Yeah, let's do that.
So just to illustrate what we're doing for the video, I put all my gear on and I put my bike against the wall. So what we're going to do is we're going to sit in the middle of the bike, and we're using the wall to balance a little bit, and then we will make sure that we push the suspension in a few times and then sit in the middle of the bike again, stabilize, and then somebody should measure the distance between the axle and this fixed point of the plastic, and then we can calculate the dynamic sag. So that's all. So let's do that. So my girlfriend measured the distance between the axle and the fixed point of the plastic while I was on the bike, and that came down to 500 millimeters. So the reference 595 minus the 500 is 95 millimeter. So actually we are within the values that shock therapy recommended to me. So I'm just going to leave it like this, and we're going to try it out. So I forgot to mention, to be able to adjust the sag, you need to loosen up this bolt of the black ring, and then with the red ring you can adjust the sag. When you move the red ring up, the spring tension gets weaker, and when you move it down, the spring tension gets tighter. So when the spring tension is more tight, it's less easy to bring the bike down. So the distance from your axle to the fixed point will stay bigger. And when you move it up, so the spring tension gets weaker, it's more easy to press it in. And then when you're going to sit on the bike, the distance between the axle and the fixed point will become smaller. And then, yeah, with your reference you can calculate where you end up. That's how you set the sag. So that was all for this episode. We prepared the bike completely for the first ride. So the next time I will see you, we will most likely be riding. And of course starting it for the first time. So I'm very excited to start riding again. So if you don't want to miss the next video of me riding, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if you like all the content, make sure to hit the thumbs up on the video. That helps out the channel a lot. So thanks for watching, and as always, see you next time.